All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. Today is Wednesday, March 25th of 2026. Looking ahead here, it is MLB opening night. We have a MLB showdown between the Yankees and the Giants to get the 2026 season underway. We have the full opening day tomorrow with all of the other teams playing, and we have a day slate there. Should be super fun. We have PGA teeing off early tomorrow morning as well, and then for the rest of the evening, we have an 8-game NBA slate and a 2-game NHL slate. So it should be a fun couple days here of DFS. For those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Andrew. I'm one of the coaches over here at SaberSim. This is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all DFS related questions. Get your questions in one of three ways here. First off, send us an email, support@sabersim.com. Second, post it live in the YouTube chat. Third way, post it in the office hours channel in our Discord server. If you're not in our Discord and want to get access to that channel, there's a link in the description of this video. You also get access to our similar channels, individual sport channels, and you get access to the rest of the SaberSim team. Just can't say enough good things about the Discord. But with that said, we do this show Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, and then we do this show on Saturdays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. So you can tune in any one of those days to get your questions answered. All right. With that said, let's get SaberSim pulled up on the screen. I do have the showdown for tonight pulled up here. Probably talk some showdown strategy since that is what is on tap for tonight. As far as questions go, we do have a couple questions that came in prior to the show. So we will start there and then kind of see where things go. So first question, I know you have answered this before, but running a normal sim and getting way overexposed to someone. Smotherman was coming in 80% last week PGA. Is there a difference in how the sims react to capping his exposure as opposed to reducing his projection? It becomes very tedious in a sport like NBA, trying to mess with projections to get guys not popping so much and with late news. Okay, so as far as the sim reacts, I think this is a interesting question, right? It's actually a good question. So, like, for instance, okay, we'll go to NBA, since you mentioned NBA, right? Okay, we'll go over to the NBA main slate for tonight, 8 games. And we're going to let this load. Go over here to build. So, I think this matters more for minimum exposures than for maximum exposures. I'm going to explain why, okay? When you, let's say, you run a build, right? And let's say you're not getting a lot of SGA, right? He's about 7% owned. You're getting a lot more Wemby and Luka. But you like SGA, right? So let's say, okay, hey, I want to play SGA. I'm going to set a minimum exposure. And he's about 7% owned. Let's say I set my minimum to 21%, right? Like, hey, I think he's good. I want to be like 3x the field here. So I'm going to set a high minimum exposure. What the minimum exposure does is it makes sure that lineups with SGA make it from your pool into your group, right? If I have, like, say, a group of 20 lineups, it's making sure that the lineups in the pool, a certain amount of them have SGA, right? The pool lineups go here. This does not mean that the lineups with SGA grade out well. So, let's assume that most of your lineups are all about 100% ROI. But the lineups with SGA are lower. They are like 20% ROI, right? Because the ROIs go off of the projections, So, hey, we're forcing lineups with SGA to be put into your group, but it's driving your ROI down because all of the lineups with SGA are like 20% ROI, while all of your other lineups are like 100% ROI. Very simple example. It doesn't always work like that, but I think it helps to simplify this. So the minimum exposure gets you the lineups, but you're not setting the minimum exposure because you think SGA is going to have an average performance, right? You're setting it because you think he's going to have a very good game, right? And you think lineups with him are more likely to help you win. So there's a bit of a kind of a clash with regards to the contest sim ROI of the lineups with SGA and your minimum exposure that you've set, right? What would go better with the contest sims is increasing his projection. Because if I'm saying, hey, I think SGA is going to perform better than you are expecting, and I think he's going to score 3 more points on average, right? The projection adjustment gets accounted for in the contest sim. When SGA scores 50, but you've given him a 3-point boost, in the sim he now scores 53. If he scores 45, he now scores 48, etc., right? So with the SaberSim projections, well, maybe your lineup finishes 15th, right? But with your projection adjustment, maybe your lineup now finishes 10th or something like that, right? It's higher up in the standings. It is getting more ROI out of the contest sims, and therefore the ROI of the lineup goes from, say, 20% up to like 80%, right? The lineups with SGA, their ROI increases because you've given him this projection boost. So all in all, in my opinion, the projection boosts work better with the contest sims than simply setting a minimum exposure does. Now, the last thing I want to say is that these two things are not mutually exclusive. There is no reason you can't do both of them, right? I could set a minimum exposure and I can increase the player's projection. So like I'm telling SaberSim, hey, SaberSim, I think this player is going to have a better game. And I also want to make sure that I get a certain percentage of them, right? These two things kind of go together. So you don't have to decide on using one versus the other. You can use both and it's totally okay. So don't be afraid to do that and experiment with that. But I think that's a pretty solid question. I remember somebody brought this up to me, like I think it was last MLB season or maybe even a season before that. There was like some scenario where they were boosting Jose Berrios because I think it was like the Angels ended up putting out a starting lineup that was like missing a lot of their key players. It was missing, say Mike Trout. It was missing Jorge Soler. It was missing, a couple other top guys. And this user like recognized that. And they were like, hey, I think, this lineup is really weak. And I think it puts Berrios in a much better position to succeed. And so they just set the minimum exposure on them. Like, hey, why are these lineups, still coming in kind of really low ROI? It's like, well, you're setting the minimum, but you're not telling SaberSim that you think Berrios is going to have a better game, right? It's evaluating Berrios based on what SaberSim's projection is, not what effectively your adjusted projection is based on this lineup change, right? So those are all things to keep in mind. With that, I thought that was a very sharp take by the Berrios user, and I think this is a very sharp question. So good ask, good way to get the show started here. That was our only question today, so I think that's a good opportunity for us to jump into a slate demo. Actually, question just rolled in. All right. Next question. How are you doing today? Is it a mistake to set 2 to 3 team stacks in MLB. What is the best way to do that without affecting the builds negatively? Thanks. So let's go back to the main slate. Always remember that on DK allows 5-man stacks. FanDuel only allows up to 4-man stacks. So just like one small difference between the two sites here. Now, we did a contest flashback demo for MLB the other day. I think it was Monday. We did a flashback kind of analysis looking at some slates from last year and seeing how top players played those slates and how they did, right? And some of the decisions that they made. I think one thing I noticed was that nobody is in GPPs is really playing less than a 3-man stack. I think 3-man stacks seem okay. I think if you're playing like a 2-2-2-2, right, that's like probably bad on DK. I don't know about FanDuel, since we don't have flashback, FanDuel doesn't allow us to access their contest data and download it and kind of process it, which sucks, but it is what it is. Now, as far as setting stacks goes, right? So I think you could do some stuff. These are like some demos that we were running, just like some super basic things that you could do. So as far as setting the stacking rules, I don't think stacking rules are bad. I think what you're doing is just guaranteeing that you get a certain thing. I would be inclined to kind of do one like we had where you say, stack, I prefer to use the advanced rules, and I like to change the pitcher to greater than or equal to 0, and then change this option that includes all positions to greater than or equal to 3 here. And we'll just say, 3 stack, or we'll say at least 3. This is like a fine baseline rule. You could change this to at least 2. To be honest, even if you did at least 2, I think that you're still going to get a lot of stacks over 2 just due to the correlation slider. So I think rules like that are fine. I think it's okay to come into the team stacks as well and set, some minimum exposures. If you want to target some teams, hey, I really like Pittsburgh and Washington. I think they're going to go a little overlooked. I want to set some minimum exposures to them. I think those are all fine things to do. I wouldn't be super concerned about affecting the builds, negatively, mostly because your contest sims and / or SaberScore are going to basically tell you which of your lineups are still good. So, you set some minimum exposures, you set some stacking rules, right? Lineups get built, lineups get put into the pool, and then the SaberScore calculates or the contest sims run. SaberSim is analyzing all of the lineups that were built using your inputs and saying, of those lineups, right, of these 514 lineups that we generated with your parameters, we think these ones are the best, right? And if you want to, I think it's okay to come into the pool and let's say you're using SaberScore, right? Okay, I'm going to set up a filter here and it's going to say show lineups with SaberScore greater than 0. So then it's going to, basically go through your pool, move any lineups with a SaberScore less than 0 to the trash, and then it removes those from consideration, right? This is a safe thing to do after the build finishes because now you don't risk playing any of those lineups, right? Hey, of all the lineups that I created with all the changes that I made, I just want to zone in on the ones that were effectively positive ROI, right? Whether in the SaberScore contest sim or your actual contest sim, right? So now we're left with 119 lineups. I can decide which 20 from that I want to play. So I think the important thing is to give SaberSim your inputs and then just protect yourself on the back end, right? A small either ROI greater than 0 or Saber score greater than 0 filter will protect you from playing any bad lineups. And then, obviously your inputs were used when all of the lineups were created. So these lineups should look like something you're willing to play, especially if you gave SaberSim all of that information prior to building lineups. So that's what I'd be looking for there. All right, let's go back to the showdown for tonight. So MLB Showdown, one thing that is different about MLB Showdown in my experience is that duplication is not as important or as prominent, or doesn't happen as much in other forms of Showdown, right? It's not similar to NFL. It's not similar to NBA. In NBA and NFL, you actively need to be conscious of how much you are duping in your contests, right? In MLB, one, the contests are usually a little bit smaller, and then two, there are more players, kind of more combinations. Stacking is still matters in showdowns, and so it just you end up in a situation where duping doesn't happen as much. You can always go back and check the MLB Showdown flashback results, but in my experience, that is what I have seen studying in flashback. So say we're going to build some lineups. I have a super small ROI greater than 0 filter on here. We're going to leave that. I'm kind of open to opening up my min and max salary. I'm not going to put on any rules. I'm not going to change the sliders from the 0-10 default here. And I'm just going to prep this group to sort by Saber score once the build is done. So I think I'm about ready here to kick off this build. One thing to keep in mind is that, when if anybody really is building a showdown lineup on your phone, DraftKings will automatically, I don't know if FanDuel does this, but DraftKings will automatically not show you any non-starting pitcher. They don't even show unless you turn the toggle off manually. So that means that nobody's who's building by hand is really ever playing relief pitchers. I think that is why relief pitchers can be of really good leverage. It's something people talk about a lot. Like, hey, if you're using Optimizer, don't be afraid to play relief pitchers because they help make you unique, right? It's another aspect to having lower dupes, is that the pitchers are not going to go all 9 innings, right? So it makes it more interesting when you are willing to play some relief pitchers. We can see how many we're getting if we go over to the util. All right, so we're getting, I'm trying to see if we have any relief pitchers in here. We have one, Jose Buto here. So they don't come up at a super high rate here because their projections are still kind of low. They do get some ownership, but it's nice to see them kind of being worked in here. Oh, and we have Sam Hentges here as well. So Buto and Hentges. So we have 2 lineups with relief pitchers. So that's about, 10% overall. Aside from that, position players, pitchers in the captain is probably a very normal kind of common thing that you're going to see. Really just because of 2 reasons. Number one is their range of outcomes are a lot more normally distributed than batters are. So a pitcher is going to have more of a bell-shaped curve where they are much more likely to hit their projection more often. And then 2, just the raw projection is so much higher, right? Like Aaron Judge is 15,000 salary, Fried is 16.5, but Judge's captain projection is 14, and then Fried is 24, right? So big projection gap there. Even a great hitter like Aaron Judge still scores 0 points. A fair amount of the time scores under 5 points about 43% of the time, even though he has these, kind of high ceiling outcomes. So SaberSim is probably, in my opinion, it's going to prefer pitchers first. I think the more lineups you build, like if you were building 150 instead of, 20, now you're going to start working in some more hitters right? But one, they're going to be very spread out, and they're still not going to be as highly exposed as the pitchers. So I'm kind of on board with the pitcher captains here. I don't mind this at all. But if you're looking for more batters, you can either force them with some minimum exposures, or I think, the more lineups you play, the more likely you are to get some of these guys. So those are all considerations when building showdown lineups. Those are like things that you want to kind of be aware of, just like builder tendencies, why those things are happening, in terms of range of outcomes and projections. So just trying to shed a little light on what you're probably going to see and kind of explain why that is, and give you some insight and thoughts there. I think one thing you'll notice is that the builder is probably going to favor stacks still, right? We see 52% 4-2s, 28% 5-1s, and then 3-3s are last, right? So I think the builder, correlation, the point is correlation still matters in showdowns. And what's cool is, right, you're getting these stacks even though the correlation slider is on 0, right? So the correlation slider amplifies the effect that correlation has. But the play-by-play sims have correlation of their own. So all we're doing here with the correlation slider is saying, hey, we're not amplifying the correlations. What the stack exposures tell me is that the correlations alone are strong enough where it makes stacking even in a showdown optimal, right? Just the play-by-play correlations between the batters still promote stacking over kind of even builds, right? And I bet if we turned up the correlation slider, this effect would be even more prominent. We might have more 5 stacks. We'd probably have less 3-3s and favoring the 4-2s and 5-1s even more. So don't be afraid to play these kind of like onslaught. I know that is like a little bit different thinking coming from like other sports. It's, 5-1s are probably a stack really that the builder pushes less often. It'll push it a little bit, but it'll usually kind of be last in terms of exposure in, NBA and NFL. So I just don't want anybody to kind of get caught up in like what they usually see. Every sport's different, and the builder kind of understands all of those different dynamics and will give you what is appropriate for the sport that you're playing. So that is my spiel on MLB Showdown for tonight. Looks like we are all caught up with questions here in office hours and YouTube. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern for our next show. So until then, everybody, take care. Good luck. Thanks.